September 19th, 1944. Puffendorf, Germany. A small village near the German border. The war was entering its final stages, but the fighting was far from over. 14 German Panzer tanks rolled through the village streets. These weren't ordinary tanks. They were some of the most fearsome weapons of World War II. Tiger tanks, Panther tanks, each one a mathematical superiority over American armor. The Germans had already destroyed 6 American Sherman tanks that morning. The crews inside never stood a chance. The Shermans burned like torches. Their thin armor offered no protection against German guns. To understand what happened next, we need to understand the Sherman tank. And we need to understand why the Germans called it useless. The Sherman tank was America's main battle tank during World War II. It was designed for mass production, speed of manufacturing over individual superiority. The United States could build Shermans faster than any nation could build tanks. But speed of production came with compromises that would cost American lives. Compromises that German tank commanders exploited with deadly efficiency. The Sherman's frontal armor measured just 51 millimeters thick. That's barely 2 inches of steel. By comparison, the German Tiger tank had 100 millimeters of frontal armor, nearly twice as thick. The mathematical difference was staggering. German tank commanders knew this. They trained specifically to exploit this weakness. A Tiger could penetrate a Sherman from 2,000 meters away. That's over a mile of distance. The Sherman needed to close within 500 meters to even damage a Tiger's frontal armor. This created a mathematical problem for American tank crews, a problem with no good solution. They had to close the distance. But closing the distance meant exposing themselves to German fire. It was a death sentence. The Germans had a nickname for the Sherman tank. They called it the Ronson, after the Ronson cigarette lighter. The Ronson lighter was famous for its advertising slogan, "Lights first time, every time." The Sherman earned this nickname because it exploded the moment it was hit. German shells would penetrate the thin armor. The shell would ignite the ammunition stored inside. The entire tank would erupt in flames. First time, every time. American tank crews knew about this nickname. They knew what it meant. They knew their chances of survival. The unofficial exchange rate on the Western Front was 5 Shermans to kill 1 Tiger tank. 5 American crews sacrificed for 1 German tank destroyed. Statistics from 1944 confirmed this brutal reality. 70% of Sherman crews wouldn't survive their first major engagement. 7 out of 10 men would die in their first real battle. These weren't acceptable odds. These were suicide odds. But the United States kept building Shermans. They kept sending them to Europe. They kept putting American boys inside these metal coffins. Because the alternative was worse. The alternative was no tanks at all. German Field Marshal von Rundstedt reviewed American tank capabilities in early 1944. His assessment was brutal. He called the Sherman scrap metal on tracks. His staff officers agreed. Wehrmacht training manuals dismissed the Sherman as inferior in every measurable category. Let's examine these categories. Let's look at the mathematical superiority the Germans possessed. Armor thickness. The Tiger tank's frontal armor, 100 millimeters. The Sherman's frontal armor, 51 millimeters. The Tiger had nearly double the protection. This wasn't a small advantage. This was overwhelming superiority. Gun caliber. The Tiger mounted an 88 millimeter gun. The Sherman mounted a 75 millimeter gun. The difference seems small, 13 millimeters, but the mathematical impact was enormous.
The 88mm gun could fire a shell with significantly more kinetic energy. More energy meant deeper penetration. Deeper penetration meant more dead American crews. Range effectiveness. A Tiger could engage and destroy a Sherman from 2,000 meters. The Sherman needed to close to 500 meters or less. This created a killing zone, a 1,500-meter stretch where the Sherman was vulnerable and helpless. German gunners called it the gallery, like a shooting gallery at a carnival. American tanks were the targets. Speed. The Sherman was actually faster than the Tiger. Maximum speed of 38 miles per hour versus the Tiger's 24 miles per hour. But speed didn't matter when you couldn't close the distance without dying. Speed didn't matter when one hit meant instant death. Reliability. German tanks were over-engineered. They broke down frequently. The Sherman was reliable. It could drive for days without mechanical problems. But reliability didn't matter when you couldn't survive combat. A reliable tank that burns easily is still a coffin. By late 1944, German tank crews had turned Sherman hunting into sport. Veteran Panzer commanders would compete for kill counts. Some crews painted Sherman silhouettes on their turrets. Each silhouette represented a destroyed American tank. Some Tigers had 20 or more silhouettes painted. 20 dead American crews. The psychological impact on American tankers was devastating. Men would volunteer for infantry duty rather than crew a Sherman. Infantry had better survival odds. That's how bad the Sherman's reputation had become. When infantry looked safer than armor, you knew the mathematical reality was grim. Training officers tried to boost morale. They emphasized the Sherman's advantages, its reliability, its speed, its ease of production. But these advantages felt hollow to the men climbing into the tanks. Reliability doesn't matter when you're on fire. Speed doesn't help when you can't survive the approach. American tank doctrine tried to compensate through tactics, through numbers, through coordination. The official strategy was overwhelming force. Send 5 Shermans against 1 Tiger. Use speed and maneuverability to flank the German tank. Attack from multiple angles simultaneously. This worked sometimes. Sometimes 5 Shermans could coordinate effectively, could move fast enough, could exploit German mistakes. But often it didn't work. Often the Tiger would destroy 2 or 3 Shermans before the Americans could even get into position. The survivors would retreat. The exchange rate remained brutal. Some American tank crews modified their Shermans, added extra armor plates, welded on additional steel, sandbags, spare tracks, anything to increase protection. But these modifications added weight, slowed the tank down, made it less maneuverable. And often the extra armor wasn't enough. The 88mm shell would still penetrate. The modifications gave psychological comfort more than actual protection. The Germans knew this. German intelligence officers monitored American tank modifications. They reported that American crews were desperate. Desperate men do desperate things. The Germans felt confident. Their mathematical superiority was overwhelming. The Sherman was useless, and useless tanks meant easy victories. But mathematics doesn't account for everything. Mathematics doesn't account for human determination. It doesn't account for tactical innovation. It doesn't account for commanders who refuse to follow the rules. September 19, 1944, Puffendorf, Germany. The Germans were about to learn this lesson, a lesson that would cost them 14 tanks, a lesson delivered by one American sergeant who didn't care about mathematics.
Staff Sergeant Julian Chansky commanded a Sherman Firefly in D Company, 2nd Armored Battalion. The Firefly wasn't a standard Sherman. It was a British modification. A modification that changed the mathematical equation.
The Sherman Firefly mounted a British 17-pounder gun. The 17-pounder was 76 millimeters, slightly larger than the standard 75 millimeters, but the ballistics were significantly better. The 17-pounder could penetrate Tiger armor from much greater ranges, not 2,000 meters, but 800 meters, maybe 1,000 meters with the right angle. This narrowed the killing zone. It gave American crews a fighting chance, not equality. The Tiger was still superior, but the Firefly at least had mathematical possibility. Possibility was better than certain death. Chansky was 32 years old, older than most tank commanders. Most were in their early 20s, but Chansky had been in the Army since 1942. He'd fought in North Africa, Sicily, Normandy. He'd survived longer than 70% of tank commanders. That made him a veteran. That made him dangerous. He wasn't supposed to be commanding that tank. His original commander had been killed 3 weeks earlier at Caen. A German artillery shell had hit their position. The commander died instantly. Chansky had been the gunner. He survived. The Army needed commanders. Chansky got promoted. His crew was new. He'd only known them for 3 weeks. The driver was Private Henderson, 20 years old, from Michigan. The gunner was Trooper McAlop, 22 years old, British, transferred from a destroyed British unit. The loader was Private Simmons, 19 years old, from Texas. The radio operator was Corporal Hayes, 23 years old, from New York. They were young, inexperienced, but they were alive. And in late 1944, being alive meant you had learned something. You had survived mistakes. Survival taught lessons that no training manual could provide. September 19th. The orders came down from Battalion Command. Push through Puffendorf. Intelligence reported light resistance, maybe a few infantry units, perhaps 1 or 2 tanks. Standard reconnaissance suggested the village was lightly defended. Intelligence was wrong. Intelligence was often wrong in late 1944. German units were mobile. They moved constantly. They set ambushes. Intelligence reports were outdated by the time they reached tank commanders. Chansky's platoon consisted of 5 Sherman tanks, 4 standard Shermans with 75 millimeter guns, 1 Firefly, his, with the 17-pounder. Standard American tank doctrine, 4 regular tanks and 1 upgraded tank for heavy targets. They approached Puffendorf from the east. The village sat in a natural draw, hills on 3 sides, open farmland to the east. Tactically, it was a terrible position to attack. Defenders would have high ground, attackers would be exposed, but orders were orders. The first German shell hit at 0847 hours. Lieutenant Carl Sherman took a direct hit. The shell penetrated the turret. The tank erupted in flames. Miraculously, the crew escaped. All 5 men crawled out, burned, bleeding, but alive. They would survive. Their tank wouldn't. 2 more shells followed within seconds. 2 more Shermans exploded. 1 crew escaped. 4 men died in the other. The mathematical reality was manifesting. The killing had begun. Chansky assessed the situation. 20 German tanks. He counted muzzle flashes, counted silhouettes on the ridgeline. 20 tanks, Tigers and Panthers. His force had started with 5 Shermans. Now they had 2, him and 1 other. The other Sherman was commanded by Lieutenant Morrison, young officer, 24 years old. This was his 3rd engagement. Standard doctrine said retreat, call for artillery support, call for air support, wait for reinforcements. Do not engage overwhelming force, especially not when that force has superior position and superior firepower. Chansky made a different calculation, a calculation not found in any manual. If they retreated,
The Germans would pursue. The open farmland behind them offered no cover. The Germans would destroy them during the retreat. Running meant death. Fighting meant possible death. Possible was better than certain. Chansky radioed Lieutenant Morrison. "We're not retreating. Follow my lead." Morrison acknowledged. He didn't question. He didn't argue. There wasn't time. The Germans were ranging in. More shells incoming. They had seconds to make a decision. Chansky spotted a depression in the terrain, a slight dip, maybe 3 feet deep, barely noticeable, but enough to get below the gun elevation if they moved fast enough. It was 600 meters away. They'd have to cross open ground. German gunners would fire. Some shells would hit, but maybe not all. "Driver, forward, full speed. Depression at 11 o'clock. Go now." Henderson gunned the engine. The Firefly lurched forward. Morrison's Sherman followed. The Germans fired. Shells screamed overhead. One hit 20 meters short, sent dirt flying. Another hit 15 meters behind. The Germans were adjusting, chanking their range. Chansky's Firefly hit the depression. They were below the gun line, temporarily safe. Morrison's tank slid in beside them. Both tanks intact, both crews alive. The mathematical odds had shifted slightly, still terrible, but slightly less terrible.
Chansky assessed their position. They were temporarily safe, but temporary meant seconds, maybe minutes. The Germans would adjust. They would reposition. They would find the angle to hit the depression. He needed to act first. He needed to break the German mathematical advantage. How do you break mathematical advantage? You change the equation. You eliminate variables. The Tiger tank's frontal armor was 100 millimeters thick. His 17-pounder could penetrate that armor, but only from specific ranges, only from specific angles. The Germans knew this. They kept their frontal armor facing American positions. They protected their flanks. Standard German doctrine. But Chansky had spotted something. A gap in the German line. 2 Panthers positioned 200 meters apart, both facing the depression where Chansky hid, both with their guns elevated, both waiting for him to emerge. Between those 2 Panthers was dead ground, a small area where neither tank could effectively fire. If Chansky could reach that dead ground, he could flank 1 Panther, attack its side armor. Side armor was thinner, much thinner. The Panther's side armor measured only 50 millimeters. His 17-pounder could penetrate 50 millimeters easily. This was the tactical problem. How to reach dead ground without dying. The distance was 400 meters, open terrain. The Panthers would see him immediately. They would fire. At 400 meters, a Panther's 75-millimeter gun had excellent accuracy. 1 hit would kill his tank. But Chansky had studied German tank crews, had fought them for months. He knew something about German training. German gunners were taught to aim at center mass, the largest target, the highest probability hit. This was sound doctrine. This was mathematical sense. But it created a vulnerability, a psychological vulnerability. If Chansky moved fast enough, moved unpredictably enough, German gunners would hesitate. They would wait for a better shot. That hesitation might give him 3 seconds, maybe 4. 4 seconds was enough. "Driver, when I give the word, full speed toward that gap. Don't slow down, don't stop. If we stop, we die." Henderson acknowledged. His hands were shaking. Chansky could see them trembling on the controls. That was fine. Fear was normal. Fear kept you alert. Fear made you fast. "McKillop, the moment we have a flanking angle on that right Panther, you fire.
Don't wait for my command. You see the shot, you take it. McKillop nodded. He was British. British tank crews had been fighting Germans longer than Americans. He understood. Chansky counted to 3 in his head. He didn't count out loud. He just counted. 3 seconds to prepare. 3 seconds to accept that he might die in the next 30 seconds. 1, 2, 3. Go now! Henderson gunned the engine. The Firefly exploded out of the depression. 38 miles per hour maximum speed. They weren't at maximum speed yet. 20 miles per hour, 25, 30. The acceleration was taking precious seconds. The German Panthers reacted, exactly as Chansky predicted. They saw the Sherman emerge. They transversed their turrets. They aimed, but they waited. They wanted the high-percentage shot. They waited for the Sherman to reach optimal range. That wait was their mistake, their fatal mistake.
Chansky's Firefly covered 100 meters, 150 meters, 200 meters. They were halfway to the dead ground. German gunners were tracking them, tracking the movement, calculating lead, calculating range, calculating the perfect shot. 250 meters. The right Panther fired. The shell screamed past the Firefly's left side, missed by 3 meters. German gunner had miscalculated the speed, had underestimated American desperation. 300 meters. They reached the dead ground. The angle changed. Suddenly, Chansky's Firefly could see the Panther's side armor, the vulnerable 50 millimeters, the mathematical weak point. Fire! McKillop didn't need the command. He'd already lined up the shot. The 17-pounder roared. The recoil rocked the entire tank. The muzzle flash was blinding. The smoke filled the compartment. But the shell flew true. It struck the Panther's side armor at 800 meters per second. 50 millimeters of steel meant nothing to that kinetic energy. The shell penetrated, detonated inside. The Panther's internal ammunition exploded. The entire tank shuddered. Smoke poured from every hatch. The crew bailed out. 3 men escaped. 2 didn't. 1 down. 13 to go. But now the Germans knew where Chansky was. The muzzle flash had revealed his position. Every German tank on that ridgeline saw it. 20 German tanks, 19 still operational. All 19 now knew exactly where one annoying American Firefly was hiding. This was the moment where most tank commanders would retreat, would try to break contact, would call for support. Standard doctrine, sensible doctrine, doctrine that kept you alive. Chansky ignored doctrine. He'd been ignoring doctrine for 8 months. Doctrine got 70% of tank crews killed. Doctrine was written by men who'd never faced a tiger at 500 meters. Doctrine was mathematical theory. Combat was mathematical reality. Different math. 4 German shells hit the ground around his position. 75 millimeter and 88 millimeter shells. Close hits, very close. Dirt and shrapnel sprayed across the Firefly's armor. 1 piece of shrapnel pinged off the turret. The sound was deafening inside, but the armor held. Reverse! Reverse now! Henderson threw the transmission into reverse. The Firefly rocketed backward. 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters. Just as 6 more shells obliterated the exact position they'd occupied 5 seconds earlier. Chansky was moving, constantly moving, never staying still. German doctrine said to hold position, fire from prepared positions, maximize accuracy through stability. American doctrine said the same thing, but Chansky had learned a different lesson, a lesson written in burned-out Sherman wrecks across France. Still tanks are dead tanks. Movement is life. Accuracy means nothing if you're too dead to fire again.
The Sherman Firefly was perhaps the most valued tank by British and other Commonwealth commanders, as it was the only tank in the British Army able to reliably penetrate the frontal armor of Panthers and Tigers at standard combat ranges in Normandy. But the powerful blast from the 17-pounder gun kicked up large amounts of dirt, as well as smoke, making it difficult for the gunner to observe the fall of the shot and revealing the position of the tank. The muzzle blast frequently caused night blindness, a problem common to any tank armed with a high-velocity gun, including the Panther and Tiger. Chansky knew these limitations. He'd been fighting with them for weeks. The muzzle flash gave away his position. Fine, he'd change positions after each shot. The smoke blinded his gunner. Fine, his commander, himself, would call the corrections. The recoil was jarring. Fine, his crew would brace for it. Limitations are only limitations if you let them stop you. Chansky didn't let them stop him.
Lieutenant Morrison's Sherman was still operational, still hidden in the depression. Morrison radioed. "What are your orders?" His voice was tight, controlled, but Chansky could hear the fear underneath. Morrison was young. This was only his third engagement. Fear was appropriate. "Stay in that depression. When I draw their fire, flank left. Hit anything that's focused on me." It wasn't a complex plan. It didn't need to be complex. Simple plans work. Complex plans fall apart under fire. Morrison acknowledged. He understood his role: bait and hammer. Chansky was the bait. Morrison was the hammer. This was the flanking maneuver in its most basic form. Flanking an enemy entails attacking from one or more sides at an angle to the enemy's direction of engagement. A part of the attacking unit pins the enemy in place with suppressive fire, preventing them from returning fire, retreating, or changing position to meet the flank attack. The flanking force then advances to the enemy flank and attacks them at close range. Chansky would pin them. Morrison would flank them. 2 tanks against 19. Still terrible mathematics, still impossible odds, still suicidal, but slightly less suicidal than it was 3 minutes ago. Chansky spotted a burned-out building 150 meters to his right. Stone walls, partial roof, good concealment. Most importantly, it had a flanking angle on 3 more Panthers. Those Panthers were focused on the depression. They expected Chansky to emerge from there again. They hadn't seen where he'd actually gone. The stone dust and smoke obscured their vision. Another mistake. Another small mistake. "Gunner, 3 targets. Panther left to right. You have side shots on all 3. Rapid fire sequence. Don't wait between shots. Fire, load, fire, load." This was the moment that separated competent gunners from exceptional gunners. 3 targets. 3 moving targets. Maybe 20 seconds to kill all 3. Maybe less. McKillop was exceptional. He'd been firing 17-pounders since 1943. He'd killed German tanks in North Africa, Sicily, Normandy. This was routine for him. Deadly routine, but routine. The first shot. The 17-pounder barked. The shell flew 300 meters, hit the left Panther in the side armor. Penetrated. The Panther jerked to a stop. Crew bailed out immediately. They knew what penetration meant. They knew the ammunition would detonate. They had seconds to escape. Simmons, the loader, already had the second shell ready. He'd loaded it before the first shell hit. Smooth, practiced, fast. The breech closed. McKillop fired. The second Panther took the hit in the engine compartment. Different result. No internal explosion, just an engine fire. But the tank was mobility killed. Couldn't move, couldn't retreat. The crew stayed inside. They would try to keep fighting. German training. Keep fighting until you can't fight. Third shell. McKillop adjusted for the third Panther. This one had spotted them, was beginning to traverse its turret,
racing to bring its gun to bear. This was going to be close. Who could fire first? Whoever fired first would live. Whoever fired second would die. McKillop fired. 2 seconds before the German Wunner. 2 seconds was eternity in tank combat. 2 seconds was the difference between survival and obliteration. The shell hit the 3rd Panther's turret ring, the weak point where the turret connects to the hull. The shell didn't penetrate into the crew compartment, but it jammed the turret. The Panther's gun froze mid-traverse. The turret couldn't move. The tank was effectively dead. Mission killed. No longer a threat. 3 Panthers eliminated in 18 seconds. 5 German tanks destroyed total. The impossible mathematics kept adding up. But mathematics works both ways. 19 German tanks had become 16. But Chansky still only had 2 Shermans. The ratio was still 8-to-1. Still impossible. Still deadly. And the Germans were learning. They were adjusting their tactics. They were spreading out, creating overlapping fields of fire, covering each other's approaches. This was what made German Panzer units so lethal. They adapted. They learned. They evolved under pressure. Chansky needed to evolve faster.
Morrison's Sherman emerged from the depression. He'd been waiting for his moment. Now was his moment. The Germans were focused on Chansky's position. They weren't watching their left flank. Morrison exploited that mistake. His 75mm gun wasn't powerful enough for frontal shots on Panthers or Tigers, but side shots were different. Side armor was weaker, much weaker. Morrison had 3 Panthers in his sights, all showing their sides, all vulnerable. He fired 3 times in rapid succession. Standard 75mm AP rounds. Not as powerful as the 17-pounder, but powerful enough for side armor. First shot hit. Second shot hit. Third shot missed. 2 out of 3. 2 more Panthers disabled. Crews bailing out, smoke pouring from hatches. 7 German tanks destroyed. 13 remaining. The mathematical ratio was improving. Still terrible. Still overwhelming German advantage, but improving. Improvement was survival. Survival was everything. But now the Germans were genuinely concerned. Concerned was different from worried. Worried was normal. Concerned meant reassessment. Reassessment meant tactical changes. Tactical changes meant unpredictability. Unpredictability was dangerous. 2 Tiger tanks emerged from the tree line. They'd been held in reserve. German commanders often kept Tigers in reserve, deployed them only when needed. This situation qualified as emergency. 7 tanks lost to 2 Shermans. That qualified as an emergency. The Tiger tank was the most feared armored vehicle of World War II. Its reputation was well earned. 100mm of frontal armor, 88mm gun, massive firepower, massive protection. A Tiger could engage Shermans from ranges where Shermans couldn't fight back. This was mathematical dominance in its purest form. The Tiger I was feared for its 88mm gun and thick armor, but had weak spots and was vulnerable at close range. Tank crews were encouraged to aim at the gun, machine gun port, tracks, commander's cupola, and fuel tanks. The commander's cupola was exposed as a high and flimsy hatch and merely welded onto the turret, making it easy to aim at. Chansky knew about the cupola weakness. Every experienced tank commander knew. But knowing and executing were different things. The cupola was small, very small. About the size of a dinner plate at 500 meters. At 800 meters, it was nearly impossible to hit. Nearly impossible. Not completely impossible. The 2 Tigers advanced in formation. They were coordinating, covering each other's approaches. One Tiger would advance while the other held position. Then they would switch. Leapfrog advance. This was textbook German armor tactics. This was what made German tank units so lethal. Coordination, discipline, tactical excellence. Chansky assessed his options. He couldn't flank both Tigers simultaneously. They were covering each other too well. He couldn't engage them frontally. Even the 17-pounder struggled against Tiger frontal armor at these ranges. He was 700 meters away, too far for reliable penetration, too close to retreat safely. He needed the Tigers to make a mistake, but these were experienced crews. They weren't making obvious mistakes. They were advancing carefully, methodically. They were hunting him, and they were good at hunting. "Makalip, can you hit a cupola at 700 meters?" Chansky's voice was calm, matter-of-fact, like he was asking about the weather. Makalip looked at him. British understatement engaged. "I'd rather not try." That meant no. British tankers had a way of saying no without actually saying no. "Try anyway. Left Tiger, Commander's cupola. When you're ready." This was insane. This was mathematically absurd. A cupola shot at 700 meters, in combat conditions, with the target moving. The probability of success was maybe 5%, maybe 3%. But 3% was better than 0%. 0% was what happened if they did nothing. The Tigers would close to 500 meters, then 400 meters, then they would destroy both Shermans with methodical precision, guaranteed, certain, mathematical inevitability. 3% chance was better than 0% chance. Chansky would take 3%.
McKillop lined up the shot. He was taking his time, more time than normal. This wasn't a standard shot. This was a once-in-a-lifetime shot. Either it worked or it didn't. If it didn't work, they would die. If it did work, they might live another few minutes. Not great odds, but odds nonetheless. The left Tiger was 680 meters away, moving forward at perhaps 3 kilometers per hour. Slow movement, but movement. McKillop had to calculate lead, had to calculate drop, had to calculate wind, had to calculate everything. And he may have maybe 15 seconds before the Tigers got close enough to guarantee kills. 10 seconds. The Tigers were at 650 meters, still advancing, still coordinating, still perfect. 5 seconds. 620 meters. McKillop's hand was steady on the trigger. 3 seconds. 600 meters. This was it. This was the moment. McKillop fired. The 17-pounder roared. The shell left the barrel at 950 meters per second. It flew through the air for exactly 1.3 seconds. In that 1.3 seconds, the shell traveled 600 meters, dropped approximately 2 meters due to gravity, drifted slightly left due to crosswind, and struck the Tiger's commander cupola dead center. The cupola was only 50 millimeters thick. The 17-pounder penetrated easily. The shell detonated inside the turret. The explosion didn't destroy the entire tank, didn't kill the whole crew, but it killed the commander, wounded the loader, filled the turret with smoke and flame and chaos. One of the principal weaknesses of the early Tiger models was the large size of the cupola, and this fault was identified by both the Germans and Russians pretty soon after the Tiger hit the field. Hitting the cupola would often seriously wound or kill the commander, and the tank would lose a good portion of its situational awareness. The tank would be forced to rely on just the gunner and driver's sights. The Tiger ground to a halt. The crew was bailing out. They were abandoning the tank, not because it was destroyed, because it was combat ineffective. No commander, turret full of smoke, visibility 0. They couldn't fight. They could barely see. They evacuated. 8 German tanks destroyed, 12 remaining. But the second Tiger had seen what happened,
had watched its partner tank get disabled by an impossible shot. That changed the psychological equation. That changed everything. The second Tiger stopped advancing, stopped its methodical approach. The crew was reassessing. They had just watched a Sherman hit a cupola shot at 600 meters. That wasn't supposed to be possible. That was outside the probability calculations. That was terrifying. Fear is contagious. It spreads through radio chatter, through observations, through implications. If one Sherman could make that shot, what else could it do? If German tactical superiority wasn't enough, what was enough? These questions were deadly, more deadly than shells. The second Tiger began reversing, not retreating, repositioning, finding better cover, finding angles where cupola shots were impossible. This was smart. This was tactically sound. But it also meant the Tiger was reacting to Chansky, not dictating to Chansky. That was a psychological shift, a crucial shift. Chansky had seized initiative. Initiative was everything in tank combat. Initiative meant you were forcing the enemy to react to you, instead of reacting to them. Initiative was the difference between hunter and hunted. Chansky was now the hunter.
The remaining German tanks were no longer operating as a coordinated unit. They were operating as individual tanks. This was a fatal mistake. A mistake born of psychological pressure, born of watching 8 tanks get destroyed in 30 minutes, born of impossible shots and aggressive tactics and American tanks that refused to die. German doctrine emphasized unit cohesion, coordination, mutual support. When that cohesion broke down, German tanks became vulnerable, individually lethal, but collectively fragmented. Chansky exploited fragmentation. 3 Panthers were attempting to retreat through the village streets, narrow streets, streets barely wide enough for tank passage. They were moving single file, no room to maneuver, no room to turn around. They were trapped by their own retreat route. Chansky radioed Morrison, "Block the far end of that street. I'll take the near end. We have them in a kill box." Morrison understood immediately. This was the classic ambush formation. Block both ends of a confined space. Eliminate targets systematically. No escape, no mercy. Morrison's Sherman raced around the village perimeter, took position at the far end of the street. The 3 Panthers were now trapped between 2 Shermans, front and rear. The Panthers had superior firepower, superior armor, superior everything, but they had no room to maneuver, and maneuver was life. The rear Panther tried to reverse, backing up to engage Morrison, but Chansky fired first, hit the Panther's engine deck, the weakest armor on any tank. The Panther's engine caught fire, thick black smoke. The crew bailed immediately. Engine fire spread fast, no time to fight. The middle Panther tried to push forward, tried to break through Morrison's position, but Morrison fired. His 75mm shell hit the Panther's frontal armor. Didn't penetrate, wasn't supposed to penetrate, but it damaged the driver's periscope, blinded the driver. The Panther swerved, hit a building wall, got stuck. Crew bailed. The lead Panther was now alone, trapped between 2 Shermans, one burning tank behind it, one disabled tank beside it. The crew knew they were dead. They knew the mathematics. They surrendered. Hatches opened. Crew climbed out, hands visible. White flag improvised from a rag. 11 German tanks destroyed, 9 remaining. But these 8 were scattered, disorganized, psychologically beaten. They were no longer a threat. They were survivors, survivors trying to escape, trying to live. The second Tiger tank that had retreated earlier was still operational, still combat capable, but it wasn't advancing. It was holding position, defensive posture. This was telling. Tigers were offensive weapons, designed for breakthrough operations, designed for aggressive tactics. A defensive Tiger was a Tiger that had lost confidence. 4 more Panthers were scattered across the ridgeline. They were maintaining their positions, but they weren't coordinating. They weren't supporting each other. Each tank was operating independently, watching, waiting, hoping someone else would engage the Americans first. This was the Cascade Effect, the psychological collapse. It happens in military units when confidence evaporates, when mathematical superiority proves insufficient, when impossible events become reality. The Cascade Effect was spreading through the German tank unit like a virus. Chansky could feel it, could sense it. The Germans were beaten, not destroyed, not eliminated, but beaten. Beaten in their minds, and the mind quits before the body. The mind quits before the equipment. The mind is always the first casualty. Morrison, we're pushing forward. Those 4 Panthers on the ridge, we're going to hit them before they reorganize. Morrison's response was immediate. Are you insane? There's 4 of them and 2 of us. Chansky's response was calm, simple. They don't know that. They think we're an entire platoon, maybe more. Let them keep thinking that. This was psychological warfare, perception warfare. The Germans had been watching 2 Shermans destroy 11 tanks, but they didn't know it was only 2 Shermans. Radio chatter was chaotic. Visual observation was obscured by smoke and terrain. They might think it was 5 Shermans, maybe 8, maybe more. Uncertainty was a weapon, maybe the most powerful weapon Chansky had. The 2 Shermans advanced toward the ridgeline, not cautiously, aggressively, like they had numerical superiority, like they had reinforcements, like they were unstoppable. This was pure bluff, pure psychological manipulation, but it worked. The 4 Panthers saw the Shermans advancing, saw the aggressive posture, saw the confidence, and they broke. All 4 tanks began retreating simultaneously. No coordination, no covering fire, just retreat. Panic retreat. The mathematical superiority meant nothing. The psychological collapse was complete. Chansky fired at the retreating Panthers, long-range shots, 800 meters, 900 meters, low-probability hits, but he fired anyway, not to kill, to panic, to maintain pressure, to prevent reorganization. One shot hit, struck a Panther's track, mobility kill, tank immobilized, crew bailed. 3 Panthers escaped, but they were routed, defeated, done. 12 German tanks destroyed, 8 remaining. But those 8 were scattered, disorganized, psychologically beaten. They were no longer a threat. They were survivors, survivors trying to escape, trying to live.
The Tiger commander was watching from 900 meters away. He had perfect visibility, perfect position, perfect fields of fire. He could engage both Shermans from safety. His 88mm gun could penetrate them easily at this range. He had every advantage except one. He had watched 12 tanks get destroyed in 40 minutes. 12 tanks by 2 Shermans. 2 Shermans that refused to die, that made impossible shots, that fought like demons. The mathematics said he should attack. The psychology said he should withdraw. Psychology won. The Tiger began reversing. Slow, careful reverse, maintaining frontal armor toward the Shermans. No vulnerable angles exposed. Textbook withdrawal technique. The commander was experienced, professional, but he was withdrawing. That was all that mattered. Chansky watched the Tiger retreat through his periscope. He could try a long-range shot, could try another cupola shot at 900 meters. But 900 meters was too far. Even McKillop couldn't make that shot reliably. The probability was near 0.
Wasting ammunition on zero probability shots was foolish. Let it go, we've done enough. McKillop looked at him with surprise, British surprise, which meant barely any facial expression at all. We're letting a tiger escape? Chansky nodded. It's not escaping, it's retreating. There's a difference. Escaping means it might come back. Retreating means it won't. This was psychological calculation. The Tiger crew would report what they'd seen, would report 12 tanks destroyed, would report aggressive American tactics, would report impossible shots. That report would spread, would affect other German units, would create reputation. Reputation was a force multiplier, better than destroying one more tank. The final 6 German tanks were scattered across 2 kilometers. Some were on the ridge, some were in the tree line, some were in the village. All were retreating. No coordination, no communication, just individual survival instincts. The German unit cohesion had completely collapsed. Morrison radioed. "What now?" His voice was different, less tense, almost relaxed. The immediate threat was over. They had survived. Survival created relief. Relief created exhaustion. Exhaustion was dangerous. Chansky fought it off. "We hold position. We don't chase. Chasing is how you get ambushed. We've won. We don't need to prove it by dying stupidly." This was wisdom, combat wisdom, the kind that kept you alive, the kind that only came from experience, from surviving mistakes, from watching others die from pursuit. The 2 Shermans took defensive positions in the village. Good sight lines, good cover. They waited. Waited for the German withdrawal to complete. Waited for American infantry to arrive. Waited for orders. Waiting was smart. Waiting was survival. American infantry arrived 30 minutes later, 2 companies, approximately 300 men. They swept through the village, found the destroyed German armor, counted them, 12 Panthers and Tigers, destroyed or abandoned. Found 2 Shermans, still operational, both crews alive, all crew members uninjured. The infantry captain approached Chansky's tank, looked at the destroyed German armor, looked at the 2 Shermans, looked at Chansky. "How many tanks were with you?" Chansky climbed out of his hatch, stretched, his back hurt, his ears were ringing, his hands were shaking from adrenaline. "This is it, 2 tanks." The captain didn't believe him, thought he was joking. "2 tanks did this?" Chansky nodded, pointed at the destroyed Panthers and Tigers. 14 enemy tanks engaged, 12 destroyed or disabled, 2 retreated. 90 minutes of combat, 2 Shermans, that's the report. The captain walked away shaking his head. He would file the report. Higher command would read it either, but the evidence was scattered across the village. 12 destroyed German tanks, 2 intact American Shermans. The mathematics didn't lie. The impossible had happened.
The official after-action report documented the engagement. Staff Sergeant Julian Chansky, D Company, 2nd Armored Battalion. Engaged superior German force. Destroyed 12 enemy tanks. 2 Panthers, 9 Panthers total. 1 Tiger. 2 Shermans survived. 0 American casualties. The report was filed. Higher command reviewed it. They were skeptical. Skepticism was normal. Extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence. The evidence was the 12 destroyed German tanks. Physical evidence, undeniable evidence. Chansky was awarded the Silver Star, the 3rd highest military decoration for valor. His gunner, Trooper McKillop, received the Bronze Star. His driver, Private Henderson, received a commendation. His loader, Private Simmons, received a commendation. His radio operator, Corporal Hayes, received a commendation. But medals don't tell the story. Medals are symbols, symbols of something larger, something more important. Chansky's engagement at Puffendorf represented something the Army needed to understand. The Sherman tank wasn't useless. It was a tool.
Tools are only as good as the men using them. The Germans had superior tanks, superior armor, superior guns, superior everything. But superior equipment doesn't guarantee victory. It guarantees advantage. Advantage isn't victory. Victory requires execution, requires tactics, requires courage, requires refusal to accept mathematical inevitability. Chansky had refused to accept inevitability. He'd changed the equation, changed it through aggression, through movement, through psychological warfare, through impossible shots that became possible, through skill and determination. The story of Puffendorf spread through American tank units. It became legend. It became proof. Proof that Shermans could fight tigers, could fight Panthers, could win. Not through superiority of will. German tank commanders heard the story too. They heard about Puffendorf, about the American sergeant who destroyed 12 tanks, about the impossible cupola shots, about the aggressive tactics. The story affected German morale, created doubt. Doubt about their mathematical superiority, doubt about their invincibility. But here's the part that makes Puffendorf truly significant, the part that elevates it beyond one battle. Chansky wasn't supposed to be in that tank. He wasn't supposed to be a tank commander at all. His original commander had been killed 3 weeks earlier. Chansky was a replacement, a temporary replacement, a staff sergeant commanding a crew he'd known for less than a month. He hadn't gone through tank commander school, hadn't received specialized training. He'd learned through combat, through survival, through watching other commanders die and learning from their mistakes. The U.S. Army command structure was supposed to assign properly trained officers to command tanks, lieutenants who'd graduated from armor school, who'd studied tactics and doctrine and proper procedure. But there weren't enough officers. The attrition rate was too high. Too many died. Too many got promoted. Too many were needed elsewhere. So sergeants like Chansky got thrust into command, without training, without preparation, just experience, just survival instinct, just determination. And sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was more than enough. After Puffendorf, Chansky continued fighting until May 1945. He survived the war, survived multiple engagements, survived the odds. He returned to Pennsylvania, opened a hardware store in a small town, married, had children, lived a normal life, an ordinary life. He didn't talk about the war. Most veterans didn't. Talking about it made it real again, made the memories come back, the fear, the adrenaline, the dead friends, the burning tanks. Better to forget, better to move forward, better to live. In 1982, a military historian tracked him down, wanted to interview him about Puffendorf, about the engagement, about how he'd pulled off the impossible. Chansky was 69 years old, retired, living quietly. He agreed to the interview reluctantly. The historian asked the obvious question: how did you do it? How did you destroy 12 German tanks with 2 Shermans? What was your secret? Chansky's answer was 2 words. 2 simple words. I cheated.
The historian was confused. Cheated? What do you mean, cheated? Chansky explained. The Germans had better tanks, better armor, better guns, better everything. So I stopped playing their game. I stopped fighting tank versus tank.
I started fighting brain versus doctrine, and doctrine loses every time." He elaborated. German tank commanders followed doctrine. They did what they were trained to do, what their manuals told them to do, what worked 99% of the time. But doctrine is predictable. Predictable means exploitable. I exploited predictability. The historian pressed for more details. Chansky continued. I moved constantly. Doctrine says hold position for accuracy. I moved. I took low probability shots. Doctrine says only fire when you have high probability hits. I fired anyway. I advanced when doctrine said retreat. I attacked when doctrine said defend. I violated every rule. That was the cheat. The rules were designed for their advantage, so I ignored the rules. This was the lesson of Puffendorf. This was the significance. Rules and doctrine are useful. They work most of the time. But sometimes the rules guarantee defeat, guarantee death. When that happens, you have to break the rules, have to create new rules, have to rewrite the equation. The Sherman tank was inferior to German tanks. The statistics proved it. The mathematics confirmed it. The doctrine acknowledged it. But Chansky proved something more important. Inferior equipment doesn't mean inevitable defeat. It means you need to be better, smarter, more aggressive, more creative, more willing to break rules. The Germans mocked the Sherman, called it useless, called it the Ronson, called it a death trap. They were right. By mathematical standards, they were completely right. But mathematics isn't everything. Mathematics doesn't account for human factors, doesn't account for determination, doesn't account for sergeants who refuse to die according to statistics. Puffendorf was one engagement, one day, 90 minutes, 2 Sherman tanks, 12 enemy tanks destroyed. Those are the facts, the numbers, the statistics. But the real story is what those numbers represent. They represent possibility. They represent refusal. They represent the difference between accepting fate and creating fate. Staff Sergeant Julian Chansky died in 1997. He was 84 years old. He lived 52 years after Puffendorf. 52 years of normal life, ordinary life, hardware store, family, retirement, quiet dignity. But for 90 minutes in September 1944, he was extraordinary. He was impossible. He was everything the Germans thought couldn't exist. An American tank commander in an inferior tank who refused to lose, who refused to die, who changed the rules because the rules were designed to kill him. The Germans called the Sherman useless. Staff Sergeant Julian Chansky called it a weapon. The difference between those two perspectives is 14 destroyed German tanks and one legend that never dies.